Hey guys, it's Justin again with another quick tutorial. This is going to be a weathering tutorial, kind of like a 2.0 I guess. A lot of people really liked my first weathering tutorial, but it was really basic and it didn't really touch on anything, or it wasn't very good. It needed a lot of improvement and still needs a lot of improvement, but this is a piece that I weathered just as a test. This is how I'm going to be weathering my EZ8. And a lot of people on Instagram wanted to know my method and how I achieve this effect. They didn't see this, well, I mean, they've seen it by now, but there was just a texturing effect that I did and people were curious what I was doing. So I'm going to use this piece and show you what I did. So you're going to need a couple of things. This can be kind of switched out in and out with other things. It really depends on how you're doing this, and there's a lot of ifs and all that good stuff. So the first thing you're going to need, obviously, is your piece that you're weathering. You're going to need some Tamiya extra thin cement. You're going to need a toothbrush. You're going to need at least one rust colored paint, but if you have multiple, that's fine as well. The more the merrier, I say. Kind of adds different effects if you use multiple different colors of rust. You're going to need hairspray. This is just a can of hairspray my grandma had laying around. This is extra hold. I don't think that really matters. You're going to need salt. There's a couple different kinds. I grabbed basically a tube of each. I got a thing of extra fine, which is what I'm going to be using. But I also have extra coarse, so if you want to do like way heavier effects, you can use that instead. It's much thicker salt, or you know, the pieces are thicker. And you are going to need paints, obviously, whatever you're gonna color your piece. I did this kind of unusually, and there's normally like a kind of a pattern you're supposed to follow when it comes to laying down paints. You're not really supposed to put lacquers over acrylics, but I don't have any rust colored lacquer paint, so I put lacquer over acrylics, and it actually came out okay. I just gave the lacquer, I gave the acrylics plenty of time to cure and set up, and I put a top coat over it before I did anything else to it, and it protected the paint underneath, so I didn't have any issues. So as long as you take the necessary precautions, you will probably be okay. So like I said, you have to kind of proceed with caution. Now you can layer other kinds of paint over any other kinds of paint. It doesn't, if you've done it before, you know what you're doing. So the first thing you need to do, you take your cement, you take your piece, you take your toothbrush, and what I did was I went ahead and I took this little applicator and I put a couple layers of paint, a couple layers of glue over the piece. I made sure it was nice and wet. You could see the glue sticking off of it. And I picked this up off of Ghost of Xeon. He has a tutorial on his channel about this. Okay, you get it roughly where you want it, and you just kind of let that sit for a second, and you take the toothbrush to it. And what that does is it kind of, the glue that's sitting on top has started to melt the plastic underneath, or that top layer of plastic basically. And you just rough it up really good. There's no real rhyme or reason to it, you just rough it up. So there we go. It looks really bad right now, but you want to let it sit for a little bit. This is extra thin cement, so it doesn't take as long to completely dry and cure up and get out of your way. But then you're going to take I forgot to mention this, small piece of sandpaper, and once everything is dried, like I said, you just kind of go over it lightly with the sandpaper. You don't want to remove all of what you've done, but basically all the frazzles that are sticking up and all the really bad looking crap. And I think the advantage here is if you're doing a bunch of pieces rather than just one like I'm doing right now, by the time you finish with all the other pieces, you'll be ready to sand your first piece. So just kind of sand it and smooth it until you get it where you want it, and you can prime it and look at it and resand it and stuff like that. That's the beauty of primer, I guess. So I think we're gonna leave it about that. Looks pretty good to me. Nothing spectacular, but you get the idea. You're basically just roughing the surface up, so without having to use any fancy tools or anything like that. It just creates a nice texture effect. And you can go in here and have some jabs at it with your your hobby knife or your pin vise or whatever tools you want to use to further weather this. You can kind of mix this with the Dremel tool like I did before with my other Easy 8, where I used the Dremel tool to weather it. You can still do that. This just adds another layer of texture to what you're doing. So we're going to move on over to the spray bench, and we're going to lay down some primer and we can see what this actually looks like. Okay, so we're at the spray booth. We've got our piece. Once we're satisfied with where the everything we've smoothed out with the sandpaper and all that good stuff, once we're ready to go on to the next step, we go ahead and put some primer on it. So I got a little primer in my cup here, and we're just gonna prime over everything. Okay, and actually it looks a lot better in my opinion. You get a better idea what the piece looks like. You can see the weather, or well, the texture much better. And if you're not pleased with it, you can go back and sand it again. I'm actually pretty happy with what this looks like. So I'm gonna go ahead to the next step, and that's going to be laying down your undercoat. Alright, so for the undercoat we're going to use Vallejo's Light Rust. This is acrylic paint, so you thin it down with either Vallejo's acrylic thinner or with water. And what I'm going to do is basically 2 drops paint to 3 drops of water, give or take. Load that into the airbrush, and we reverse wash it. See how it sprays? It's a little watery, so put a little bit more paint in there. I think I got a little bit more water than I wanted. Actually dried up really fast. There we go. Much better. Okay. So we take our piece and we just kind of lightly spray our rust color on it. With acrylics, it's a little better to put light coats, so you might want to turn your pressure down a little bit. And I'm just using the air here to kind of help dry it off a little bit so it doesn't you know, pool. Just build your coats up. Then just mist the air, or keep the air on it so it dries it. Now this rust is very orangey. So I guess that'll do for this. It looks fine. So let's go do that. Get the rest of this junk out of the cup. We'll clean that up, and we'll come back with the next step. Okay, so next you're going to apply a top coat. I'm going to use Pledge Future Floor Care because it's not a lacquer. I would really recommend not using a lacquer top coat here, just because if you use a lacquer gloss coat, you run the risk of eating through your paint. So we've got the rust colored piece, and we've got some top coat, and we're just going to mist that on really lightly at first. Just come on through. I don't know why this always runs through the airbrush like this. And then I'll come in a little heavier on the second go around. And just make sure I get everything. So the next step in this is to make sure this dries at least, I'd say, about 6 to 8 hours. That way this has plenty of time to cure. The top coat has time to dry. You know, so anywhere between, I mean, there's no maximum time I'd let it dry. You know, the longer it sits, the better. But at least 6 or 8 hours at a minimum. And I left my first piece for a day just so I could make sure that it fully set in. So I'm going to let this sit for a little while, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next steps. Okay, so after you've given your piece sufficient time to dry and cure and everything to set up, you're ready for the actual weathering step of this entire process, outside of your texturing, of course. And that's entirely optional. You don't have to texture beforehand. If you want to keep a smooth surface, that's fine. I just feel like this adds a kind of another layer of reality to it, I guess. So you take your piece, you take your hairspray, and this is where you're gonna have to work kind of quickly. Basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna spray hairspray over the entire piece, get it, you know, kind of wet, and then you'll take some salt, whichever one you decide to go with, and you just sprinkle it over the piece. Now you don't want to cover the entire piece, obviously, but you want to kind of get it near points where you think would be heavily chipped, or where there would be chipping at all. So, you know, around edges where parts would rub together, things like that. And then obviously there would be just natural wear, you know, from weather and you know, regular maintenance and things like that anyway. So you just want to kind of try and plan ahead, but at the same time, where you're not actually physically doing it yourself, it adds, you know, a more, you know, another kind of a layer of randomness to it, so it's not so deliberate looking. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this real quick. Okay, so we got it nice and wet looking. Just take really small pinches at a time, that way you don't overdo it. Because it's really easy to overdo. And once you're happy with the effect, I think that's actually pretty good. Yeah, so once you're happy, you put it back on your thing, you let it dry for maybe about 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll do the last step. Okay, so your piece has been sitting for about 5 to 6, maybe a little longer minutes. This kind of gives the hairspray a little bit of time to dry. It keeps the glue, or not the glue, the salt in place, and it just kind of prevents things from moving around. Once this kind of looks dry, and it's not as wet looking, what I do is take my paint. You can shade and stuff like that too if you want. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to skip all that. I lower my pressure down to about 10, and I just very lightly mist the color that I want on. So we're going to get back about yay far. We're just going to mist it on real lightly. That way we don't disturb the salt crystals. Alright, there we go. So, give me a second, we'll go back to the table, and I said this would be the last step, but I forgot there's more. So, we'll go to the table, and we'll get this off, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so, we've got our piece, and there's a couple different ways you can do this. A lot of people recommend taking your part, you dip it in water for a little bit, and then you scrub the thing off with a toothbrush, which works, because it'll kind of start to dissolve the salt a little bit. And then the toothbrush bristles get under the paint and kind of do their own thing. It works really well. You can use your thumb and just kind of take them off yourself. You can use a toothpick, whatever you want to do. So, Alright, just kind of carefully inspect the piece and make sure you got all the pieces off. And this one kind of looks a little funky because I used a different rust. But I used a darker blue and a lighter rust so you could see a better contrast. But there you go. So that's what the effect should look like. And then if you're pleased, you know, the next step would be to throw some weathering pigments over it, or well, not weathering pigments. You throw a flat coat on it, and then you can throw like any kind of pigment. I like the Vallejo pigments. They're really nice. You know, any kind of wash, decals and stuff like that, and then you weather those up. But yeah, there you go. So, and then you apply your final top coat and you're done. It's pretty easy. Again, it's kind of easy to overdo. I think this piece was a little bit overdone. But I still like the effect. It looks really neat. It's very random. It doesn't look as deliberate. And the texturing looks really cool. So, that's all I got for this one, guys. So hopefully I helped you guys out a little bit. Hopefully it works well for you guys. And I'll see you with the next video. So thanks for watching. Later.